Today we will finish with Aristotle, and on Wednesday we'll come back to Hegel. Aristotle and Hegel, actually that's what I wrote my thesis on, and I think they are a good place to end the theory, because the book doesn't finish Hegel, but Hegel actually does a very good job building on Aristotle, and then Marx is practically completely built his system on Hegel. So we will talk about Marx in the end when we talk about social justice and all that. So it is a good way to do it. Now, virtue ethics. Why are we even ending with Aristotle? It seems a little bit odd that we started, remember, we started talking about theory with Mill, utilitarianism, who is actually one of the most recent philosophers. He worked in the 19th century. Then we moved to Kant, who lived 100 years before Mill, and talked about Kant. Then, from Kant, St. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century, like 600 years before Kant. And now we're going all the way back to Aristotle, who was active about 2,400 years ago. But one of the reasons it's done in this way is because virtue ethics is actually one of the most recent developments, and this theory is very popular recently in modern ethics, because as you will see, for many people it makes the most sense. There are some shortcomings with definitely Kant and Aquinas. Mill's theory, utilitarianism, is good, but not everybody is satisfied with it, and virtue ethics kind of fills this gap. What exactly is it? It's concerned with the character, habits, attitudes, or dispositions which we have, looks at particular virtues like courage and how they lead us to happy, good life. As we will see with the Greeks, it's not as simple as it may seem, because the words they were using are not the same as the word virtue. Nonetheless, there's definitely something there, and when we will see how Hegel developed it, it'll make more sense. But in general, it depends on some sort of role models. The book actually does give a good example. Pat Tillman. Did you guys read this part of the book? Do you know who Pat Tillman is? Or maybe you just know who Pat Tillman is? Are you reading the book at all? Well, you should be. I mean, the quizzes definitely are based on the book. Anyway, Pat Tillman was the football player. Very successful. He was offered a contract for millions of dollars. He turned it down to go and fight in Iraq. He actually volunteered to fight in Iraq. Why would anybody do that? Okay, do you understand that now? Do you guys sometimes feel like you have to do something because it's easy? Because think about it this way. I mean, okay, if you are already in the military or thinking to join the military, that's one thing. He was not in the military. He was doing football very well. Offered multi-million-dollar contract. He turned that down. That is not the same thing as, I'm unemployed, why don't I just go fight in Iraq? So that is quite a sacrifice. But how many people can actually do something like this? What does it take to do something like this? Now, what is the payoff? Because with $1 million contract, the payoff is very obvious. Millions of dollars. What's the payoff about joining Iraq war? You can get shot there, and even if you're not shot, you're certainly not going to get millions of dollars. That's not going to happen. But you do get something. What do you get? Yeah.
Something intrinsic?
Like honor, like feeling good about yourself and who you are. And that is the type of thing we're talking about right now. That seems to be more valuable than millions of dollars, because there are plenty of people who have millions of dollars and are completely miserable, hate themselves, hate everybody around them, end up committing suicides. There's case after case you hear like this. Clearly, money is not enough to be happy. It's even arguable whether you need money at all to be happy. I guess it doesn't hurt, but it could hurt sometimes. for some people it's actually a bad thing. There is another cases like this with many lottery winners. If you ever do a research on that, try to write a paper, you'll see lots of people who win lottery have their life ruined by this. Why? How? Well, yeah, exactly. They're losing some of the most important things. It actually also strikes frequently at the family. Because imagine a relation in the family, one person suddenly is a millionaire. Now, there's so many issues which can immediately come up. If you're married, your spouse is also technically a millionaire now. You're two millionaires. Can I do better than you? I'm a millionaire now, right? Before you know it, they get divorced. Same thing with children. Hey, daddy, I actually want to start my own business. Can I have a couple of $1 million? No. Why not? I never talk to you again. Families break up very quickly. And imagine somebody like a cousin calling you next day. Hey, I heard you won millions of dollars. Well, guess what? I'm actually in debt. I need to pay off my student loan or something. Can you loan me $100,000? That is very, very difficult situation to be in. On one hand, you do care about these people, they are your family. On the other hand, you're just going to start giving away all this money immediately. That is very uncomfortable. And even if you do it like you give somebody money, right? Then next day they call you again. Oh, guess what? I went and gambled a little bit and now I lost all of that. That can go down the hill so quickly, like you can't even imagine. And this is in addition to the things you mentioned about your job and so on. People quit their jobs, say, oh, I don't need my job anymore. Okay, what are you going to do now? Just spend this money every day? That is not something to live for. It's okay as a side thing while you're doing something valuable, but if you're not doing anything better than that, if your entire life is just spending money, that's horrible. After a very short time, you'll have a bunch of useless things piled up in your closet and you'll feel more miserable than ever. So that's one of those things which frequently people just get really distracted by the fact that we all need money all the time. We need them for a variety of really useful things, like going to a doctor or whatever. But the money still is not the most important thing. So this is what virtue ethics is kind of about. Virtues in everyday life. So virtue ethics asks not what you should do, but how we ought to be. How we ought to live our life in order for us, at some point when we close to the end of life, could look back on it and say, hey, I actually achieved something here. I did something valuable. I'm proud of myself. My life was a success. What does it take? We frequently don't think about it. We live day to day, like we wake up, go to work, have dinner, do this, do that, go back to bed. Next day, same thing, next day, same thing. But every once in a while, at least, we should be thinking about it. Because life will definitely be over one day. And at that point, you're either going to be proud of it or not. Some people don't, of course, have a chance to think about it because something tragic happens. But most of us live to old age, and we actually can reflect on it. And at that point, it's too late to change anything. So you better change it now when you're still young and you have your life ahead of you. Is happiness really equal to pleasure? Well, that's an interesting question because clearly that wasn't Tillman's choice in a sense of selecting pleasure. What can possibly be pleasant about fighting in Iraq? I can't imagine that. Even if you enjoy, I don't know, this extreme environment, there's still so many things about it which you wouldn't enjoy. Obviously, receiving millions of dollars seem a lot more pleasant. Nonetheless, he chose fighting for Iraq. So there's something more fundamental about it, at least to some people, and that actually is the people who we usually admire, isn't it? Many of us think, I can't really do it myself, but if I see somebody else doing it, I admire it, because I have to give it to them. They really are something. So what was the Nicomachean Ethics? It's one of his most complete works. He actually also has another work on ethics, but this one is considered later, written later in time and more complete, and one of the most important works in ethics, period. But remember, like I said at the beginning, we mostly have his lecture notes. So this is his lecture notes. This is not written for general public. Even though actually ethics is easier to read than metaphysics and many other of his works, which is why I assigned it, because it's not a very hard reading. But it was part of his lectures. He did lecture in a similar, I guess, way as I do, and all of us do. He had very different students now, because his students were typically young men of this very noble background. Their parents were able to pay for them to go to a lyceum. Remember, his school was called Lyceum, which I'm guessing was extremely expensive by the time, so they were among the elite young men. Obviously, they were preparing to become political leaders, pillars of the community. They were not getting ready to get a job. They would never get a job in the same sense as most of us do. But nonetheless, there is something there for us as well. So what is ethics according to Aristotle? It's a science of correct conduct that guides us towards a goal, achieving human excellence. Remember, arete, that is the word we mentioned when we talked about Plato. And Greek word arete cannot really be translated as same as virtue, even though typically it is translated virtue. But it's hard to say whether it's virtue. Greeks would talk about arete of a knife. Knife, if it cuts well, it has arete. I don't know if you can say knife has a virtue. That would make absolutely no sense in English language. But we don't have the exact word to translate it. And Aristotle agrees that this is a body of objective knowledge. But it's not as exact as mathematics, right? In mathematics, you get very precise formulas, calculations. In ethics, you don't. In ethics, you have to be more flexible. So he tries to give general outline. But if you do the readings, you will see almost immediately he tells us that his ethics is actually just a preliminary to politics. Politics is the most important science. Ethics, you understand the nature of individual human happiness, but politics is going deeper. It understands the nature of the happiness of all human beings, how specifically the human good is to be pursued within a city, polis, how to balance the good of one person against another. And Aristotle thinks that is more important than individual happiness, because individual happiness produced as a result of that. Here's a good quote from Ethics. Knowledge of the good seems to be concerned of the most authoritative science, the highest master science. And this is obviously the science of politics, because it lays down which of the sciences there should be in the cities and which each class of person should learn and up to what level. Now, science at the time, of course, the Greek word they're using is not the same as what we think about today. It is more a theoretical knowledge which can be applied to many different things. Now, what are the main questions he's trying to address there? What is a good life for human beings? Right? Number one question immediately kind of draws our attention. Mapping the relation between happiness and virtue. How are they related? Practical approach. Naturally, ethics is not just theory. It is something which we can and should apply in real life, as hopefully you guys will. And then he discusses the three possible options. He immediately says there are three possible options, three possible roads, approaches to life we can take: life of pleasure, life of politics, and life of contemplation. He says not money though. So why not money? We kind of already touched on it. Why money cannot be the goal in life?
For things
instrumental. It's not intrinsic, it's instrumental. That's exactly the difference, because you use money to achieve certain things, and those things are really what you are going for, not the money by themselves. Money by themselves is just a tool. But you may be using money to achieve pleasure, and many people do. So what exactly did Aristotle say about pleasure, pursuing pleasure? He says, yeah, the masses do think that happiness is pleasure. This appears to be quite slavish, choosing life fit only for cattle. He is very condescending about that. He says, yeah, that is not the kind of life sophisticated people would ever seek. The masses do, but we are not the masses. We are the elite. And even from, I guess, more kind of a modern day perspective, you can say that pursuing pleasure is perhaps a little bit of unworthy of most individuals. Note that at some point he actually says in the book, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. Don't get me wrong. It's not like you should never have pleasure. It's just pleasure shouldn't be the goal. The goal in life, life should have different goals. If all you seek is pleasure, you're really not different from a cattle. Cattle, animals, they seek pleasure all the time. To them, like a tasty meal and a good nap, that's all they need. Human beings more sophisticated, so definitely we can look at something more. Then he looks at honor or wealth. What about honor or wealth? Sophisticated people, men of action, see happiness as honor, since honor is pretty much the end of practical life. He says, well, honor is not enough, because in terms of honor, you depend on opinion of other people. So in this case, he's talking about the honor, other people honor in you. It's nice, but that depends on these other people, and sometimes they may give it or not. So it's kind of hard to rely on something like this, pursue something like this. So once again, it seems to be instrumental and not a final goal. Same thing with wealth. Wealth, money, basically pretty much the same thing. In that case, instrumental, not intrinsic. He discusses Platonic forms, and in particular, remember, for Plato, the form which was above everything else, you may say the master form was the form of the good. The good. But Aristotle says, is there such thing as the good? Is there something which can be the good in any possible sense? And he says, no, obviously not. There are things which are good for this purpose. There are things which are good for another purpose. We're using the word good in all sorts of different ways. All goods are different. If we are looking at the final good of human life, that is not the same thing as a good meal, right? So he thinks that there is no just something of good, but there is definitely something which is not instrumental but intrinsic in terms of the final value. So what do you think it is? What does he say is we all striving for? Well, he actually has a word which he uses, Greek word, which translated traditionally as happiness. And I guess we can put it this way because indeed, whether it's peace or fulfillment, that is happiness, isn't it? So happiness, he says, kind of takes all these words and combines them. The problem though is he is not using English language, he is using Greek language, and in Greek the word is eudaimonia. It's traditionally translated as happiness, but it's not a great way to translate it, because literally what it means, means good, right? And daimon means a personal guardian angel type thing. Daimons, which is the word demon comes from, were lesser gods for the Greeks who each individual has, and daimon would take care of you, like your personal guardian angel. So the idea is to have a good personal guardian angel. Now, translating it as happiness is somewhat misleading, but a better translation would probably be success, successful life. So some scholars prefer that translation. Success. We want to have success in life. How we define it could be different, but we all want it. Who doesn't want to have success in life? At least in some form. Like if peace is success for you, then I guess that is successful life. Like if you are about to finish your life and it was peaceful and that's what you wanted, you can say, I had a successful life. Same thing you can say, I had a happy life. The problem with the word happiness in English, we may have, like you can say happiness at the moment, right? I'm happy right now. Well, that doesn't apply to eudaimonia, because that would not be a momentary feeling. You can only say it about your entire life. My life was successful. So that the translation happiness is a little bit misleading. Nonetheless, he thinks that's the goal. So this is a quote with happiness. You can replace it with success. So happiness, therefore, doesn't lie in amusement. It would indeed be strange if the end were amusement, and one were to take trouble and suffer hardship all one's life in order to amuse oneself. For in a word, everything that we choose for the sake of something else, except happiness, which is an end. How to exert oneself and work for the sake of amusement seems silly and utterly childish. So to him, since it is the end goal, right, this final goal in life, just to amuse yourself the entire life, like we go through so much trouble in life. We're striving towards something. And if that was amusement, that seems to him silly and childish. Now, like I said, success is probably a better word. Because even happiness seems a little bit lightweight compared to what he actually means. But the idea is, before you die, if you look back at your life, if you can say, I was successful, then it's a good one. Now, to understand a little bit more about it, we again have to go back to Greek language and Greek thinking. Greeks also had word ergon. Ergon is the characteristic activity of anything. So, for example, ergon of a knife would be ability to cut, because that's what the knife is for. It's a function of a knife to cut, right? Function of a marker would be to write on a board. And that is what a marker is for. Now, if you do your function well, you have arete. But that, in terms of human beings, raised for the Greeks, and we can think about it too, an important question. What is ergon of a human being? Do we have a function? Do we have a characteristic activity? Well, the way Aristotle was thinking about it is this. How are we different from other animals? Because we're different, right? We are animals, but we are not like other animals. So what's special about us? We're rational animals. We have reason. We can reason, whereas other animals cannot. They have some sort of immediate emotions. They obviously have some thinking going on in their little heads, or big heads, but not like we. We can reason way ahead. We can do mathematics, complicated formulas, and that's why we are so much more powerful than they are. No animal can ever take us down because we can come up with ingenious ways to defeat them. So that's what's special about us, and that, according to Aristotle, is our ergon. Since this is our characteristic activity, just like an ergon of a lyre player, for example, is to play lyre, and a good lyre player does it well, has arete. Happiness itself, or success in life, is virtuous activity, human activity in accordance to virtue, and we should do it with using our reason. Okay, so having virtue by itself, according to Aristotle, is fairly useless. It's not enough, because you can sleep and have a virtue. But what is the value then of that virtue? You actually have to have activity according to virtue. You have to do something. And that is definitely one thing about our life, that happiness for us is an activity. A success definitely is an activity. We do things all the time. And how we do them, that is basically what either makes us successful or not, either makes us happy or not. A person of virtue does find pleasure in virtuous activity, whereas a person who is vicious finds it in different things. And this is what is important. You have to have the correct goal in life. And Aristotle thinks that not having a correct goal in life is the biggest problem for most people. Because people who commit crimes, for example, and basically ruin their life, also pursue something. They see some sort of a goal. It's just a wrong goal, very wrong goal. And as a result of pursuing that, they are not happy. And this is rather obvious if you look at it from a side. Have you ever seen a criminal who's happy? I can't even imagine, even if somebody got away with it. Well, for one thing, there's only so much you can get away with. Eventually it catches up with you. But I can't imagine them being happy. And certainly most of them don't get away with it. They think they will get away with it, but then they end up in jail and they really don't look happy. And they blame other people for that. But certainly it is their own choice. So that is a good example. Now, again, as a typical Greek, he was talking about these different parts of the soul, just like Plato did. So what are the parts of the soul according to Aristotle? We can think about it more in terms of psychiatry, because soul is psyche in Greek, so that is very closely connected. So he thought that we have rational part and non-rational part. Rational part, he thought, is actually an immortal part. It has reason, intellectual virtues. It's interesting, he did not believe in life after death. So how is it then immortal? Can rational part be immortal even though you are not immortal? What do you guys think? How can reason be immortal even though you die? Because you pass it to other human beings, right? It doesn't die with you. What you reason during your life, your work, especially if you write something, if you tell something to other people, it stays with them. So you may die, but this stuff doesn't die, and it keeps on kind of building, and other people contribute to it. So when we use reason today, we're using reason created by all those billions of people who lived before us throughout thousands and thousands of years. So in that sense, it is immortal, but not in the personal sense. But then we also have non-rational part, which has no reason, and then that is also something which part of our psychic. It has two parts as well, vegetative and appetitive, or desiring. Vegetative is just our natural inclination to seek nutrition and growth. That is something we don't even think about. It just happens, right? We don't really desire it. It's just part of who we are as an animal in this case. And appetitive and desiring part, it's slightly different, because here we could direct it, right? We have different desires. Most of them we don't really control, in a sense that they just appear when we see something. For example, if you see somebody good looking, you may have a desire for sex. It's not that you are just sitting there and thinking, why don't I have this desire? No, it arises by itself, right? It is, again, part of your natural constitution. But then you can use your reason to direct it in some way, away from it, towards it. You can do something to actually get to know these people and perhaps indeed have sex with them. Or, on the contrary, you can tell yourself, that's not going to happen, forget about it, let's move on, and then you indeed move on. So that requires some strength of the will, because this is another problem many people have. They don't have the will strong enough to overcome these desires. There are people who literally just fall immediately for every single desire they have, and then they let this non-rational part to take over. And as a result, again, they can get into trouble. When we talked about the road rage, remember that's another example of that. Road rage is when you really get your anger, let your anger get out of control. You not using a reason to control it. Of course, we all sometimes get angry, but you must put it under the control of reason. And if you don't, then that is not good. It can lead to very bad consequences. So the virtues, on the other hand, could be of two kinds as well, related to different parts of the soul: intellectual virtues and virtues of character. Intellectual virtues would be associated with reason, and that would be wisdom, judgment, and practical wisdom. Not everybody has it. You can learn it for sure, and this is the purpose of classes such as this one in particular, where you learn these certain things, which hopefully can help you make better practical decisions once you face with certain choices. But virtues of character are not like that. It is stuff like courage, generosity, temperance, and this is not something you can teach somebody. You cannot just explain to them how to be courageous or generous. That is something Aristotle says we can only learn from childhood and only through our parents, through our upbringing. Because if you do it on a consistent basis, you will learn how to do it. If you do not do it already, you're not going to learn how to do it. And it's more of a question of habit in this case. So practical wisdom, which ends are worthy to pursue? Well, we have to ask ourselves, first of all, what is the happiness? You have to have correct understanding of happiness or success. Because if your goal is wrong, then that definitely will lead you towards the wrong path. You have to understand the role of virtue in happiness. What does virtue has to do with it? Why is it important to be virtuous? And then you have to actually apply it, because it's also possible, and he slightly disagrees with Plato in this sense, that there are people who do have correct understanding of what happiness is, understand the role of virtue in happiness, and still are not virtuous. Why not? Well, they may lack strength of the will, or they are not being put on a good path, which is, of course, is also very important, because remember, many of these things, like I said, you learn from childhood. So if you grew up in an environment where it was considered okay to steal, to murder, nobody ever told you any better, even once you learn that this is not a good way to go, you're already on this path. And you may understand that this is not something which makes you happy, but you simply have no choice now. Your entire character is built around it. So what is the purpose of human life? He says, we take this kind of life to be activity of the soul and actions in accordance with reason, and the characteristic activity of the good person to be carrying this out well and nobly, and the characteristic activity to be accomplished well when it is accomplished in accordance with the appropriate virtue. Then if this is so, the human good turns out to be activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if there are several virtues, in accordance with the best and most complete. Okay, so virtue is a state of your character. Morally good person is not simply the one who performs the correct actions. Aristotle kind of makes an example. We can think about it this way. For a virtuous person, to do something vicious is like for a musician to hear somebody play very bad notes on a musical instrument. Like, you see somebody who can't play, sit down at the piano and go pang, 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 pang. And if you really love music and understand music, to you it's like, can you please stop? So that's how you should react when towards all these vicious actions. They should naturally, immediately be alien to you. A good person delights in virtuous actions and vexed at vicious ones, as a musical man enjoys beautiful tunes but is pained by bad ones. Once again, he emphasizes you need practice to do that. That is not something you can just listen to professor talking to you about over the course of lectures and suddenly become virtuous. You definitely need this upbringing, and there are people who nothing I can do or anybody can do to change their mind on that, because that's just not how they grew up, not how they are. But there are still things which can be useful for everybody, which you can learn for practical purposes. And he also says, well, aren't vicious people sometimes happy? Can't you just be very vicious and get money in this way and get power and still enjoy it? This is the same thing Plato was asking. And he actually admits that they can have some degree of happiness and success, but virtue always pays better. Virtue is just a better way to live. You will be happier if you're a virtuous person compared to this vicious person. So that's just the reality of it. Many people may not understand it, but that's how it is. And then his famous virtue as a golden mean. He says, virtue is concerned with passions and actions in which excess is a form of failure and so is a defect, while the intermediate is praised and is a form of success. So it's an intermediate position between two extremes. Not a mathematical mean, because it's not like you have to be exactly in the middle. In fact, in some cases, you can be closer to one extreme or the other extreme. But it is avoiding the extremes. So here's the interesting kind of table explaining that. The activities, what would be the vice of excess, vice of deficit, and the mean. So confidence in facing danger, for example. You can have too much confidence in facing danger, in which case it is a vice of rashness. You are too rash. You can also have a deficit of that, in which case you are a coward. That's cowardice. But the correct amount is courage. So courage is not too much bravery, not too little bravery. It's the right amount of bravery. Enjoying pleasure. Again, he's not saying you should completely avoid pleasure. That would be being puritanical. If you completely avoid pleasure, there's something wrong with you. Of course, nothing wrong with pleasure. But you also shouldn't be self-indulgent. Too much pleasure. All you think about is pleasure. Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. That's all on your mind. Temperance, the correct amount of having enough pleasure, but not too much pleasure. Giving money, he says you should be generous, of course. If you are too stingy, if you never give money to anybody, that is no good. But also don't be vulgar. Don't give too much money. Don't be flashy. Don't try to impress others by giving so much money so they would go, whoa. Generosity, that's the correct amount, a mean between the two. Same with truth-telling about oneself, right? If you tell too much truth about yourself all the time, you're boastful. That's not good. But also if you never tell truth about yourself, that's self-depreciation. Then you I'm horrible at everything, I'm no good. That's not good either. So self-honesty. Be honest with yourself and others to a reasonable degree. Of course, some actions are always wrong, like vices in particular, murder, adultery. There's no right amount of murder, right? In between, right? Not too much murder, not too little. No, murder is always wrong, adultery is always wrong. Certainly, that only applies to virtuous activities, not to vice activities. Virtuous activity, you have to have the correct amount. But how do you know what's the correct amount? That's not something somebody can just immediately tell you. And again, it's not just right in the middle. You have to have some practice. You have to be already have experience and understand. And some people can't understand it, unfortunately, no matter what they do. And again, you can't teach somebody because it depends on the situation. It depends on the person. Sometimes you have to be more generous, especially if you have more money. Now, naturally, like, I don't know if you guys heard the spouse of this Amazon guy She is given billions of dollars. Well, can she? Sure. She has. And by the way, the funny thing I recently read, because of the value of the stock went up, she gave away all this money, and she is still richer than she was a few years ago. It's like she can't keep up with this mountain of money. So for her, generous is obviously different than it is for us. If we start giving out, we don't even have billions, but anything comparable to that will be completely broke. So for her it's one thing, for us it's a different thing. But each one of us also has certain amount of money, certain budget, so we can be generous in our own way depending on what we have. And depends on for what causes, right? Certain causes are more worthy than others, and so on. So that is something you, like I said, he thinks you should really go through all these experiences yourself and figure it out in each case. And if you do that correctly using your reason, then you are a virtuous person. So the summary of a morally good virtuous person would be this. Somebody who carefully follows reason. That is number one priority for Aristotle. Reason is at the core of everything. He does not believe that you should just follow your feeling all the time. Reason should guide you. Desire to do the right thing. At the core of everything should be this desire to do the right thing. In that sense, remember, if we're looking at it, virtue cannot be, it's not a consequentialist, not deontological theory. It's kind of a combination of the two. Because consequentialist looks at the end goal only, right? Deontological says, do not even worry about end goal. You have to just follow what is right thing to do in every case. But here it's both. It's both in a sense, because you actually have to understand what's the right action. And at the same time, you have to think about the consequences too. You have to have well-formed character. The character is important. Character is a combination of all those traits we have, and we have to try to keep it in balance, and so on. Know the proper goals in human life. It's very, very difficult, especially when you are young. But hopefully this class can help at least with that much, because even though practical wisdom you can only obtain as you go through these things yourself, but what is the important goals, we can talk about it. It's part of the theory. Can estimate how to achieve those goals. That's another thing. And we will, when we talk about Hegel, that actually becomes very important to Hegel too. Because you can have goals which are completely unachievable, right? So what is then the purpose of that? Can it really help you live your life if you set yourself a goal which is unachievable? If I was going to try to become a world champion in basketball, do you think I could? I'm 5'4", so I think unlikely. That is very unlikely. In fact, if I did that, I'd be wasting my time. Maybe I could do some other sports like chess pretty well, but not basketball. So you have to be realistic. And that is, again, yeah, it depends on many things, including you, who you are. In that sense, your personal goals are different from other people. And the one who has the most experience in making tough moral decisions. So that's another thing you should be able to do. This can only come through, the whole combination can only be a result of bringing from childhood, but also education. So what's the best form of life now? Because Aristotle does talk about that. The highest and the most satisfying form of happiness linked to what is best, very best within us. So what do you think it is? Now, first of all, remember what is God doing according to Aristotle, the unmoved mover. No, he serves as a goal, but he is not setting it. He is thinking. He's thinking. And what is he thinking about? Thinking. He's thinking about thinking. Thinking about thinking, pure theoretical, rational activity. Now, obviously, we can't do it because we're not gods, but we can do a lot of it, and the more we do, the better. So what would be the best life? Yeah.
A life of contemplation?
Philosopher. Shockingly enough, that is the best life, life of rational contemplation. activity of contemplation fits this definition. Why? Because first of all, reason is that part of us which most fully expresses our humanity. No other animal can do it, we can do it. So naturally, if we double down on it and do as much as we can, that's the best. We can engage in reason continuously in the midst of life's other engagements. Reason doesn't prevent you from doing anything else. In fact, it helps you to do other things. It helps you to be a good parent. It helps you to be a good student, good driver, and so on. Rational contemplation is self-sufficient activity, for we can engage in it on our own. That's another thing. You can just sit there and rationally contemplate and think, and some people actually are happy to do that. Not everybody, but if you can do it, that's actually pretty good, right? Because it helps you in situations when you don't have anybody else and you need to entertain yourself. Can you guys do it? Have you ever tried it? Well, you must have tried it, because sometimes you just don't have any choice, right? You're just sitting there and there's nothing. It's getting a little bit harder now because of all the cell phones, because when you have nothing else, you pull out your cell phone, unless they take it away from you, and they do sometimes, depending on where you are. I remember I was going with my mother to the immigration office. She had to get her green card, and because of that, they take away your phones there, and you just sit there for hours and waiting for them to call you, but you don't have anything. So then what do? You can think. Or you can talk too, I guess, if you have somebody to talk to. But if you don't, you can think. Yeah, sometimes you can be too tired even for a cell phone. I just want to sit and stare in the sky. But yeah, so that is something which is very good and very useful. If you can do it, it's fantastic. Then it is activity we engage in for its own sake and not for the tangible results it brings. Because even though sometimes, obviously, we use thinking to achieve the results, but sometimes we don't. Sometimes we do it just for itself. We just enjoy to think. And that in itself gives us pleasure. And that imitates the activity of God, the unmoved mover. If it's good enough for God, surely it's good enough for us. So that's, for all these reasons, Aristotle thinks is the best form of life. Don't seem very enthusiastic about it, to be honest. But I mean, the reason I'm asking, and in general, that this is the most important part of this course, because in order to be ethical, and it's an ethics course, right, you really have to get the correct course in life. You have to understand what are you trying to achieve. Because if what you're trying to achieve is wrong, if that's indeed some pleasures or money, you'd be a lot more inclined to cheat somewhere or to do some unethical things. Because most people do them not because they are really rotten, but because they have the wrong idea about what is the most important thing in life. And then you read about this, accountants and so on who were scheming the money. And why were they doing it? Because they thought that the most important thing in life is their pleasure and money. And they were trying to achieve that. They thought they were not going to get caught. They did get caught. Maybe some of them don't get caught. Maybe some of them are scheming us right now. But the only way for you to truly be ethical is if you actually have the correct goal in life, is if you actually understand what is important, and then you will not do any of these things. Otherwise, you can listen about it all day, and that's not going to do any good. So that's why I'm asking, because, I guess when you were 10 years old, it was a little too early to ask what's your goal in life. Even though you probably did have some sort of a goal in life, but that changes quite a bit with age. But now is a very good time to ask this. If I come back to you with this question 20 years later, what you may say is, oh yeah, now I have a goal in life, but it's a little too late. If I knew it 20 years ago, I would probably do a lot of things differently. So 20 years ago is now. What is it? Anyway, We will actually come back to this next time because we need to talk about Hegel too. But let's just briefly go over his politics, because remember, he said that his ethics is preliminary to his politics, and he has the whole political theory on top of that. And he considered politics the most important work he's done in his life. Unfortunately, it's unfinished. We think he died while he was working on it. Why do we think so, even though there's no direct evidence? Because he considered it the most important and he unfinished it. What could be the other reason other than death? Certainly, like, death is something we can't control. So in that case, even if you think it's most important, you may not finish it. But otherwise, if you think it's most important and you have enough time, you will finish it. And he wrote a lot other than that. So definitely not the lack of desire to write. So possibly his last work builds on ethics. In fact, it actually repeats some of the last part of ethics. The first part of politics is the same. Our purpose is to consider what form of political community is best of all those who are most able to realize their ideal in life. And that leads us to Hegel very nicely. So he talks about nature, because remember, we also talked about Aristotle when we talk about natural law theory. Yeah, he believes there is such a thing as natural human life. Nature does have an effect on us. And then he says that civilization naturally advanced through these stages. First, household. Obviously, even the very, very early human beings must have had some household. You can't possibly live if you don't have children, and I guess some sort of a maid. Even animals live like this, so that would be the most primitive one, oikos in Greek. Then village. People started living together in bigger communities, such as village, form of several households. Why? Why did they do that? They realized that there's actually benefits to that. They can better fight those wild animals, protect each other, rather than one family, right? Imagine you're one family, husband, wife, a few children, living in the forest all by yourself in some crazy world where there are no laws or anything. That is pretty tough. But if you have several families like this, you already have some protection. You can help each other. But the highest one to him is the state, or polis, formed of several villages. Greek state, Greek polis wasn't huge. Athens was a state. So in that sense, we're talking about a city of about 30,000 people. I don't think Aristotle would ever think of United States of America as an ideal size of the state, because that's just way too many people. But at the time, there was nothing like this. Greek people didn't live together as a state. They had these different poli, this polis, they had different laws and so on. But to him, this is the actually best form of life. The state exists for the sake of good life. In the end, it is the best. Man by nature is a political animal, says Aristotle. The state is by nature prior to the family and prior to the individual. This is very alien idea for many people today, but Aristotle definitely believed so. He said only life in a community with other people is a virtuous life leading to eudaimonia. Why did he think so? Well, if you remember some of our conversations before about you being completely alone on an island, you can understand. Can you survive all by yourself on an island? Probably. Not a guarantee. It depends on an island. But if it had enough, I don't know, fruit and vegetables and not too many wild animals, then perhaps you'll survive. But would you be happy? Does it even make sense to say I was happy on that island? No, you would not be happy. I can't imagine anybody being happy on that island without a single other human being, without any way to communicate to these other human beings. I guess if you imagine yourself at the very least having a phone and an internet, then maybe you can be somewhat happy, although I don't think that would be truly happy, but certainly that would be better than being completely isolated. But if you're completely isolated, you will not be happy. That's impossible. At the same time, in a community with other people, you may be happy or may not be happy, but at least you have this option, right? So he thought the state is actually the highest one. A city-state is not sharing of a common location. That's a quote from Aristotle. Does not exist for the purpose of preventing mutual wrongdoing and exchanging goods. Rather, while this must be present, if indeed there is to be a city-state, when all of them are present, there's still not yet a city-state, but only when households and families live as well as a community whose end is complete and self-sufficient life. So just he rejecting this idea of the contract. We just tolerate other people because, well, otherwise they will wrong us or something. So we come up with these rules, we live with other people because we can't help it. He thinks, on the contrary, we only can be happy with these other people. We may not be happy, but if we want to be happy, that's the only way for us to do it, and we have to organize the state accordingly. He actually went through constitutions, like the politics has constitutions of all the existence poli in Greece at the time, comparing them. Which ones are better? Which ones are worse? Is it a monarchy? Is it a democracy? What's the best way of life? So how do you achieve happiness then? Set up the best laws which are meant to achieve maximum happiness. The best laws must be with accordance to the first principles which you discover through your intuition, and then that will help as many people as possible to achieve happiness.